let's get right into it. We're going to do a tactical breakdown of a really critical operation from the Spanish Civil War, the nationalist attempt to cross the Jarama River. What you're going to see over these 4 days in February 1937 is how a plan for a lightning-fast maneuver gets bogged down and turns into a brutal, grinding battle.
Now, it's really important to note that everything we're about to go over is based strictly on the detailed operational maps and research from Colonel F.J. Victor Rodrigo's project. We are sticking to his material to give you a rigorous, fact-based military analysis of what happened.
So, here's our plan of attack for this briefing. We'll start with the mission and the overall plan. Then we'll dive into the crucial night raid. After that, we'll look at the main crossing under heavy fire, figure out why the advance stalled, and then finish up at the absolute crisis point of the battle. All right, first things first. Let's look at the big picture. What was the strategic goal here? What was General Varela's actual concept for this entire operation? So what you're seeing on this map, the idea de manuvra, is a pretty classic military concept. The idea was to use several brigades to pin the enemy in place, to fix them, while a more mobile force would punch across the Jarama River. Once across, they were supposed to grab the high ground, the Pajares Heights, and then pivot south. The goal? To completely unhinge the Republican defensive line. So, how were they planning to pull this off? Well, the whole operation was laid out in 4 distinct phases, and everything, and I mean everything, hinged on the success of Phase 1, a surprise night raid, what's known as a golpe de mano, to capture the Pindoque bridge completely intact. That bridge was the absolute key to the whole thing. Okay, let's zoom in on this special operation, because make no mistake, this was the linchpin for the entire offensive. If this failed, nothing else mattered. And this map shows you the specifics beautifully. On the night of February 10th, a specialist unit, the Tiradores de Ifni, had the job. Their mission was to infiltrate behind enemy lines, storm the Pindoque Bridge, wipe out the defenders, and, this is the most important part, disable any demolition charges. Failure meant the offensive would die right there on the riverbank. And just so we're all on the same page with the terminology, when we say golpe de mano, this is exactly what we're talking about. It's a rapid, violent surprise attack with a very specific, limited objective. The whole point is to get it done with overwhelming speed before the enemy even knows what hit them. You know, the true effectiveness of this raid really hits home when you hear it from the other side. A Soviet officer, Batov, who was there with the Republican forces, wrote this. Around 3 in the morning, the Moors fell upon the company by surprise, without a shot. Of the entire company, only 4 survivors remained. Just think about that. It was a textbook example of a swift, brutal, and totally successful surprise attack. But, and this is a huge but, here's where we see the first bit of battlefield friction. In the heat and chaos of the assault, the commandos missed one of the demolition charges. It went off, and it badly damaged the bridge. So they took their objective, but the main artery for the entire offensive was now severely constricted. This created what would become a fatal bottleneck. And that brings us to the main event, the morning of February 11th. You have the main force trying to cross a damaged bridge in broad daylight, and you have a Republican army that is now wide awake and reacting fast. So at 9 a.m., the main force starts to move. But trying to get troops and equipment across that damaged bridge was painfully slow. That choke point immediately became a magnet for every gun the Republicans had. We're talking intense artillery and non-stop air attacks, all targeting the vulnerable soldiers being funneled onto that one narrow crossing. And the Republican response wasn't just fast, it was incredibly well coordinated. They hammered the bridgehead with heavy artillery. They strafed and bombed it from the air, and maybe most importantly, they launched 2 separate tank assaults directly at the crossing site. The first at 10 a.m. and another one at 3 in the afternoon. All right, now let's jump forward just 2 days to February 13th. By this point, all that initial momentum is completely gone. The offensive has ground to a dead stop. Looking at this map, the picture has totally changed. Those fluid arrows that showed a rapid advance, they're gone. The battle has stagnated. It's turned into a brutal, grinding fight for every inch of ground. The nationalist columns are stopped cold, smashed up against stiffening resistance, and dealing with their own incredible exhaustion. And you know what? The map annotations themselves tell the whole story. The key factors are laid out right here. A complete lack of reserves, no ability to replace the mounting casualties, just enormous attrition from the constant fighting, and simply put, exhausted columns that physically could not push any further. This comparison just lays it all out plain and simple. On the nationalist side, you've got 3 worn-out brigades with no relief in sight. Meanwhile, on the Republican side, what do you see? They're accumulating fresh reserves, their units are fighting fiercely, and they now have clear air superiority. The balance of power has completely shifted.
And that brings us to the climax of the battle, February 14th. This is the day. This is the decisive moment, the critical point for both sides.
Now, look at this map. From 4 p.m. on the 14th, it's explicitly labeled Punto Crítico de la Batalla, the critical point of the battle. It notes that casualties are high on both sides, but it makes one thing crystal clear. The nationalists have 0 reserves left. They are now facing superior Republican numbers in infantry, artillery, and air power. You know, this is the textbook definition of what military planners call a culminating point. The offense has pushed as far as it possibly can. Any further advance is impossible. And now the question isn't, can we advance? It's, can we even hold the bridgehead? And this final map shows you the result of all that fighting. The ambitious plan to outflank Madrid was dead in the water. Yes, they secured a bridgehead, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. The bridgehead was now contained, it was heavily outnumbered, and it had transformed from an offensive springboard into a defensive liability. And if you need one number to sum up the entire situation, here it is. The force ratio had completely flipped. The initial attacking force of 5 nationalist brigades was now facing a defensive wall of 16 Republican brigades. That window of opportunity hadn't just closed, it had been slammed shut.
So all of this brings us to the essential analytical question. Do you call this operation a failure because it fell so short of its grand strategic objective? Or was it a costly success because it managed to establish a permanent foothold across the Jarama River? That's the tough question this brutal 4-day battle really leaves us with.